Hello everyone, welcome to Done by Design, GoGo Dayaway workshop. This is session 1 and it's called Repeat After Me. So we are making a double layout in this session and we are focusing on using a repeated element or a repeated shape. Now sometimes repetition on a layout is a really good place to start. If you're struggling with a bit of inspiration, pick a shape, repeat it multiple times, and I tell you what, your layout will come together so easily. I've chosen circles for this layout, but we're going to fold over the top so they look a little bit different to normal circles. But this would work with stars. This would work with any other shape whatsoever. Hexagons. Circles, stars, hearts, etc. So literally anything. So anyway, we're going to start off by making the base for the layout. So take those 2 sheets of paper. They are the 6x4 element papers, so they have lovely journaling cards on the reverse, but don't look at those. We are up for the check print only, and I'm just going to gut the middle. On my example, I have done a non-equal border, but on yours, please do 1 inch in from each edge. That works perfectly. I have trimmed down the white cardstock as well. Check out the measurements in the instructions because they're not square, and that's because they need to butt up to the middle line and then have an even border around the rest of the layout, but not in the middle section. So just check out the measurements for that. And then you should be left with this double canvas. Don't stick it wrong like I just did. Just make sure it all matches up. And what I tend to do is I just trim the edges slightly if they're ever so slightly not aligned, so I have a perfect middle. And then what I do is I turn the layout over completely and apply regular double-sided sticky tape to the back of the layout, and that's just to hold the 2 layouts together while I'm working on it. I find it's so much easier to work on a canvas that isn't in 2 separate pieces. So I would highly recommend that you do that. And then you can work on the layout. Okay, so I'm going to use the old-fashioned method of a compass, or a pair of compasses is the official word, and a pencil and then scissors to create my circles. So you need to identify the sheets of Indigo Garden. This collection is by Simple Stories, and it's called Indigo Garden, or Simple Vintage Indigo Garden. Goodness, I can't talk today. Identify the 3 basics papers. They have lovely names, something like Primrose and Meadow and things like that. But ultimately they're like pink, yellow and green. And there's a white one. So anyway, there's 3 sheets and they're all double-sided. So just identify those 3 sheets. We'll also need the gutted pieces of the checked print as well, and then we're going to draw circles onto these papers and then cut them out with scissors. If you have metal dies, you could use those. To be honest, the exact sizes of the circles don't really matter. As long as you have some big ones and some smaller ones, the exact measurements probably don't matter at all. So if you have metal dies and you want to use those, go for it. If you have a silhouette machine or similar, you can absolutely, and if you're working from home, of course, we won't have one of those at the hall, but then you could do that, or some people have circle cutters, or some people have large circle punches. So just whatever works for you. But if you don't have any of those things, then old-fashioned pair of compasses, pencil, scissors does the job perfectly, and that is what I have done. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time cutting all of those out, and I'm also going to distress the edges, and then I'm going to start folding over the tops. So you can see that I have made a little bit of progress in that respect. I'm using my scoring tool to put a line, but I'm not measuring the depth of the tab that's going to be folded over at the top. I'm just going by eye, really. When you fold over the checked one, just make sure that whatever is on the reverse will be fairly plain, or it is a pattern that you're happy with, because obviously the reverse of that checked print is journaling card. So you could have something, you could have words on there, for example, and that might not look right. So just be mindful of what part of the circle that you fold. Then I'm taking my paper piercing tool and mat, and I am piercing holes. Again, I'm doing this by eye. I'm not measuring these at all. I'm just aiming for kind of central, and obviously the two holes together need to be either side of the central point. So it doesn't matter if they're slightly off. It really, really doesn't matter. I'm just going to, eyeball those completely. And I've just dressed the edges of all of them too. Now, the one circle that I haven't folded the top over is the piece there in the middle that you can see that is cut from one of the journaling cards. So the reverse is the check print. And I just cut out the yellow butterfly and the white flower, and I just thought it was really pretty, and folding over the top just didn't look right because it would have covered up part of the butterfly. So anyway, that one has not been folded over, but all the rest have. Now, on the tabs, some of them I am going to tie in a bow, and some of them I'm just going to put a long stitch through, because the bows end up being a kind of like a design feature, and they almost get in the way if they're not on show. So if you wanted to cover up half of a bow, it's a bit awkward to do that. It ends up looking a bit squashed and not good. So I haven't put a bow on every single one. Also, the bows would be a bit big on the smaller circles. So I've just put, I think I've done 5 bows and 5 long stitches. And with the long stitch, I've used a needle for this in order to poke through the holes that I've just made with my paper piercing tool. And for the long stitches, I've just secured those ends on the back with some regular sticky tape, and on the bows I've literally got both ends at the front, and I've just tied them in a bow, and it's as simple as that. If you're worried about them coming undone, pop a little tiny bit of wet glue onto those knots, and then they won't come undone. So this is one of the fun parts of this layout. I really enjoyed this technique. So I've used the stencil, the Bramble Fox stencil, and I've placed it under where I'm going to put my circles, and where all the dots on the stencil are going to show, I'm using my pencil to draw around all of those dots. So I haven't just put a dot in the middle, I've actually drawn around each of the holes. I'm going to do the same on the right hand side, just want a small amount showing there, and then later on I do a little bit at the top as well, but you can do that at the same time as you do the other two. It's just that I decided to add that later. So make sure you do that one as well. And then now I am going to I was just drawing around roughly where my photos and circles will go, just so that I don't forget placement later. But yeah, so now I'm going to add my Nuvo drops. Now, when you do this, you need to, maybe you should practice first on a piece of paper that's not on your layout, because there is a little bit of technique to using these little fabulous bottles of like liquid enamel dots, and it just sometimes, basically I squeeze the bottle and end up with this little bulbous dot of Nuvo drops. And then what you really need to do is lift it straight up, not out to the side, because if you do get a little tail, it will end up falling over, and then you won't have a perfect circle. If you have your tail and it's going directly up into the air, gravity will do its job and it will eventually sink back down a little bit. You can tap the back of the layout in order to help with this if your Nuvo drops are particularly thick, but these are new bottles. Usually that happens with bottles that are a bit older, but these are obviously brand new bottles, so therefore you shouldn't have that problem. I didn't have that problem. They do all sink down, but like I said, when you pull your bottle away from the dot that you've just applied, make sure you pull it in an up, completely upwards direction rather than off to the side at all. And you'll soon know what I'm talking about when you give this a go. You will just get this little tail that it's a trail, if you like, that is still attached to the liquid that's inside the bottle. So in order to leave it on the paper, sometimes I will kind of give it a little tap, but I find that doesn't actually work. It just makes the tail bigger. So I tend to just pull up into the air directly above, and I find that is the best method. And even though you end up with a little mountain, that peak will go down. Okay, so now I have applied those Nuvo drops at this stage before I then did the rest of the layout. However, you could add these Nuvo drops right at the very end because Nuvo drops take a long time to dry. So we're going to be sitting in a hall doing this layout, or some of you will be at home, but some of you will be at the school hall. And therefore, these Nuvo drops will remain wet for several hours, or they'll become touch dry fairly quickly. But if you put any pressure on them, they will like squidge. Just be mindful that if you're working on the layout and your Nuvo drops are still wet, then there's a very high smudge risk. And it's nothing more frustrating than that. What I would suggest you do if you're not happy to do that is to wait until the very end, because you can see you're able to see the pencil marks, and you can actually build the whole layout around the Nuvo drops, and then you can put them on as the last thing. That's definitely a safer option, but it's just that you can't, you don't get the effect of them while you're making the rest of the layout. And it is so cool. I bet everyone's going to be dying to do this technique because it just did turn out really super well. But if you can restrain, then maybe wait until the very last point and do it then. Okay, so now we'll just pretend that my Nuvo drops are dry, and I'm now building the rest of the layout. So I've got all of my circles stuck in place. Most of them are raised on foam pads. I've also put pom-pom trim around 2 of the larger circles. So one right at the very left side, which is the checked print, and then one on the right side, the yellow one. I've put the navy pom-pom trim around those, but I've only put it in the areas it will show. So where it goes under the photo, for example, on the right-hand side one, I've not got any pom-pom trim behind the photo, just because I wanted to preserve it so I could use it in another class as well. I've also backed the Bramble Fox titles. So we have a pack of 2 titles and a couple of arrows by Bramble Fox, and It's All Good is one of the titles. So I have backed the word good with green paper. That's one of those Simple Stories Indigo Garden basics. I think that's the colour Meadow. I've just drawn around my Bramble Fox perspective and then cut it out and then stuck it to the back of the perspective. So it just gave a little bit of extra colour. If I'd been really clever, I would have perhaps cut out the middles of the letters. However, I'm not very good with a craft knife, but for anyone who is good with a craft knife, that would probably be worth doing. I think it would look really good. Just the middle of the G, the middle of the 2 O's, and the middle of the D. So not where the letters overlap, but just those middle sections. Okay, so the other thing you should note about doing a double layout is that you need to make sure that nothing is going over the join. Now you can see clearly that I do have things going over the join, but that's okay because I'm going to be able to cut through them. I'm also going to, but when I was placing them in position, I was making sure that I had enough adhesive on both sides of the join, so that when I cut those elements, they will stay in place. I also, just a little tip, if you're going to place some elements over a joint, make sure they're things that can be cut. So, i.e. don't put these like enamel brads because you can't cut through those, obviously. Don't put those over the joint. And also make sure that your joint will not be cutting through someone's face. It doesn't matter if you cut off an elbow, like I have done, but it does matter if you cut through the middle of someone's face. It just doesn't look good. Okay, so so just be mindful of that when you're placing elements. Stickers are fine, but anything bulky that you can't cut in half, like these buttons, the enamel dot, they're not enamel dots, they are enamel decorative brads, then they are no good. Okay, so I'm pretty much, getting there really nicely with this layout. It's coming together really well. You can see that I've now drawn in my circles for my next lot of enamel dots at the very top of the layout. And you can see how I can just leave that until I'm ready, because it doesn't really matter if I do it now or later, because there's nothing cluttering that area, and it's very simple to do later on. I'm adding some buttons. I'm tying them all through with grey embroidery thread, and some of them I've tied in knots on the front, and I've just tied them into a double knot. what I haven't done is tie a bow, because the bows would be too big. But I've tied them into a double knot, and then I've added some glue to the knot so they don't come undone later, because obviously I've trimmed the ends quite tightly. The other thing you could do is do this the other way around, so your knot is on the back of the button, but then it just makes it a bit more bulky and difficult to stick in place. I'm going to stick my buttons in place with glossy accents. I feel that I use quite a decent blob and kind of embed the button within the glossy accents. I find that that's the best way of sticking bulky items like this, and like wood veneer things, things like that. So that's what I'm using there. I'm also adding some sequins. We have these lovely Spiegel Mum scrap sequins. They're always gorgeous, aren't they? So I'm just sprinkling a few of those around the layout as well. And again, they are something that I attach with glossy accents. I sprinkle them in place first, then I get my glossy accents and a paper piercing tool. I put a small amount of glossy accents on the end of my paper piercing tool, which makes it tacky, and therefore I'm able normally to move the sequins out of the way. I kind of like picking it up with my paper piercing tool, and then putting a blob of glossy accents underneath, and then moving the sequin back into place. Yeah, there we go. They are all stuck down now. I've added some of the stickers. Now I'm just going to add my Nouveau drops to there. And don't forget what I said about the peaks going up to the ceiling rather than off to one side. Otherwise you end up with lopsided peaks and you get your little tail in the wrong place. Definitely practice first. It's a little bit of a skill, but it's so fabulous. I just love Nouveau drops. They're great fun to play with. And this stencil was perfect for them. The stencil formation is just totally awesome, isn't it? So okay, so now I'm just going to add a few splatters of ink, and I'm taking the purple Distress Oxide, I think it's called Dusty Concord, and I'm placing a small amount onto a craft sheet. You could use a piece of packaging or a piece of craft sheet like I've got there, and then I'm mixing it with some water and then splattering it using a paintbrush. So yeah, that's come out okay. I'm just moving the splatters going along the layout as well. It kind of just helps with the flow. The splatters link all the clusters together. So there we go. That is, I think that is my layout complete. I do have to add my journaling as well, but I do that after off camera because I forgot to do it before I splattered, and that's never a good thing. So there we go. You can see my journaling over on the right hand side. So that is that layout complete. I really hope that you have enjoyed this class. I love how this layout turned out. The Nouveau drops are just fabulous, and I love the circle shapes as well. So yeah, thank you very, very much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next class.